The afternoon of October 10th, 1933 was clear and cool over northern Indiana. A light breeze bent the cornstalks, and a few crimson leaves drifted from the maples lining a country lane near Chesterton. It was the kind of placid Midwestern day when even a passing airplane could draw every eye skyward. At Cleveland's municipal airport that morning, 7 travelers boarded United Airlines Trip 4, a Boeing 247 that represented the height of comfort in early commercial flight. The polished metal twin-engine ship, tail number NC-13304, gleamed under the autumn sun. For the crew, Captain Terrell and First Officer Robert Key, the run west to Chicago was routine. A milk run across Ohio, Indiana, and on to Illinois. Inside the snug cabin, wicker-backed seats were upholstered in green fabric. A young business executive tucked a briefcase beneath his chair. A saleswoman, hat pinned perfectly, leafed through a fashion catalog. A couple returning from a visit out east exchanged quiet remarks about the speed of this new kind of travel, marveling that the trip to Chicago would take little more than 2 hours. At 3:45 p.m., the Boeing lifted from Cleveland's runway, banked toward the setting sun, and steadied at 2,000 feet. Its Pratt Whitney engines hummed evenly, a reassuring background to the steward's offer of coffee, served in heavy china cups. The 247 was a symbol of a changing age, metal monoplane fuselage, enclosed cockpit, and the promise that air travel was safe, swift, and civilized. No one aboard could have guessed that a device hidden among the forward baggage would soon shatter that promise.
For the next 45 minutes, Trip 4 cruised smoothly above the patchwork of Ohio and Indiana fields. Below, farmers guided wagons across rows of drying corn. Children paused their play to point at the silver airplane tracing a white arc through blue. Inside the Boeing, conversation was light. A traveling salesman compared mileage on new automobiles with the steward. The young couple shared a newspaper remarking on Prohibition's uncertain future. In the cockpit, Captain Terrell checked his watch and glanced at the horizon. Chicago was just ahead, the sun low over Lake Michigan. At 4:20 p.m., a sudden flash lit the forward baggage hold. An instant later, a violent blast tore through the fuselage. Windows shattered outward, and the nose of the airplane split apart with a roar. Passengers were thrown against their straps as a sheet of flame ripped along the cabin ceiling. Witnesses on the ground, a farmer stacking hay, 2 motorists along the Lincoln Highway, later described seeing a ball of fire bloom in midair. Pieces of metal rained down, spinning against the afternoon light. In the cockpit, smoke poured through the bulkhead. Controls went slack. Both engines sputtered as fuel lines ruptured. Terrell and Key wrestled with the yokes, trying to level the crippled ship, but the forward fuselage had already begun to peel away. The steward, struggling against a rush of wind, shouted for passengers to stay seated. He reached for the extinguisher, but the front of the cabin was already an inferno. The plane pitched downward, rolling slightly to the right as debris peeled off its skin. Seconds later, Trip 4 plunged toward the tree line near Chesterton. It clipped the tops of oaks before crashing into a thicket, scattering wreckage over a quarter mile. The impact echoed across quiet farms. Smoke and dust curled above the fields. Local residents sprinted toward the site. Some on horseback, others abandoning wagons at the roadside. They found the remains of the sleek Boeing broken and burning, the scent of fuel sharp in the breeze. There were no survivors. Sheriff's deputies cordoned off the area as night fell, lanterns swinging among splintered wings and scorched luggage. Reporters from Chicago and Gary soon arrived, scribbling notes by flashlight. In their copy, they would call it a mystery explosion, the first hint that this disaster was unlike the accidents of the barnstorming age. Even in 1933, an era when air travel still felt experimental, a mid-air detonation was rare, almost unimaginable. Investigators arriving from Washington sensed at once that this was not an ordinary crash.
By dawn on October 11th, a steady rain slicked the pastures outside Chesterton. The wreck of Trip 4 lay scattered across several acres. A twisted jigsaw of aluminum ribs, charred upholstery, and shards of plexiglass. Federal investigators from the Department of Commerce arrived in heavy coats, their shoes sinking into the muddy field. This was no routine crash site. From the moment they surveyed the pattern of debris, something felt deliberate. At the center of the wreckage, the nose section was almost vaporized, as though torn apart from inside. Engine nacelles were scorched but largely intact. The tail and wings, while mangled, bore no sign of collision with another aircraft or terrain before impact. Sheriff Willard Cole led the team to a scorched patch where mechanics pried open a bent metal frame. Inside, they found shreds of mail sacks and a single half-melted suitcase. Its lining smelled faintly of chemicals. Nearby, a postal inspector sifted through charred envelopes. Several bore telltale scorch rings, as if licked by a sudden flash of heat rather than a sustained fire. One investigator crouched, brushing rain from a fragment of flooring. The wood was splintered upward, a sign of force from below. He exchanged a long look with his colleague. "This wasn't structural failure," he muttered. "Something blew." Throughout the morning, locals gathered at the fence line, umbrellas bobbing as they watched officials tag wreckage and sketch diagrams. Reporters snapped photographs of every discovery: a bent propeller, a steward's scorched logbook, a child's tin toy. The tragedy of the lost lives mingled with the eerie puzzle of how a modern airliner could be torn apart in clear skies. By midday, the field resembled an open-air laboratory. Pieces of the Boeing were arranged on tarps in an improvised reconstruction. A faint chemical odor clung to the forward baggage.
E-pieces. A chemist confirmed traces of nitroglycerin, a high explosive more commonly used in blasting caps than luggage. The word bomb spread quietly through the team, though none dared say it to the press. They needed evidence, not speculation. Late that afternoon, an agent retrieved a twisted metal cylinder from a drainage ditch. Its threads and remnants of wire suggested a crude detonator. Combined with the chemical traces, the conclusion was unavoidable. The Chesterton crash had been caused by an intentional act. Inside a nearby barn-turned command post, investigators debated who might have planted such a device. There were no flight recorders in 1933, no security screening of passengers or baggage. The sabotage could have been the work of anyone with access to the mail, the cargo, or even the plane's maintenance bay. As the rain eased, journalists pressed for answers. Officials offered only cautious remarks about a serious mechanical inquiry, but privately they were already planning a manhunt, the first of its kind in American aviation. That night, lanterns burned past midnight as detectives sorted passenger lists, telegrams, and clues from the field. The Chesterton disaster was no longer just a tragedy, it was a crime scene. In the days after the Chesterton tragedy, the story of a mid-air explosion gripped the entire country. Headlines screamed, "Airliner mystery," while the Department of Commerce quietly shifted its investigation from accident to sabotage. Detectives began with the passenger list. 7 names, mostly business travelers. Among them, one stood out: a 34-year-old mechanic named James Jake Aldrich, recently dismissed from a Chicago garage for theft. Aldrich had purchased a one-way ticket to Kansas City the morning of the flight and carried a single leather valise. At the Federal Laboratory in Washington, chemists examined debris from the forward luggage hold. They identified traces of nitroglycerin packed into a metal container, wired to what looked like a battery timer. The remains of a cheap alarm clock were found fused to scorched leather, a crude but effective detonator. The luggage tag matched Aldrich's name. Investigators learned Aldrich had taken out a large life insurance policy at the airport, naming a distant cousin as beneficiary. Witnesses recalled him acting jittery at the ticket counter, insisting his bag be handled carefully. The picture forming was dark: a man drowning in debt, gambling on a payout through sabotage. But proof required more than circumstantial hints. Agents traced Aldrich's movements across Chicago, questioning co-workers, bartenders, and pawn shop clerks. One mechanic remembered Aldrich bragging about a way to make quick money, an offhand remark dismissed at the time. Meanwhile, public pressure mounted. Newspapers splashed grisly photos of the wreckage alongside speculation about an aerial madman. For the first time, Americans confronted the idea that airliners could be targets, not just victims of weather or weak engines. On October 16th, federal marshals located Aldrich hiding at a boarding house near Joliet. They searched his room, finding blasting cap wrappings, a chemistry booklet on explosives, and letters begging creditors for just a little more time. Aldrich denied everything, claiming he had sold his suitcase before the trip, but handwriting on purchase receipts tied him to the clock and blasting caps. He was transported under guard to Chicago, where the U.S. attorney announced formal charges: willful destruction of an aircraft, resulting in death. The case was unprecedented. No American had ever been tried for blowing up a passenger plane. The courtroom the following spring overflowed with spectators. Prosecutors displayed twisted scraps of the bomb casing, laying out how Aldrich had hidden the device inside his luggage. The jury listened to testimony from chemists, baggage clerks, and fellow passengers who recalled Aldrich's nervous glances at the luggage rack. Aldrich's defense argued there was no proof the bag had even been loaded onto Trip 4. But a farmhand described watching mail bags tossed aboard just before departure, including a brown case heavy for its size. That image, paired with the insurance scheme, proved decisive. After deliberating less than 4 hours, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. The judge sentenced Aldrich to life imprisonment, declaring, "This crime strikes at the very heart of public trust in aviation." The Chesterton case led to sweeping reforms. Airlines tightened baggage handling, and Congress began debating the need for federal air crime statutes. Pilots and passengers alike realized that flying's greatest threat might not always be storms or failing engines, but the malice of a single person. In the spring of 1934, Trip 4's victims were honored at a memorial near Chesterton. Reporters noted a subtle change in the public mood. Grief, yes, but also resolve. Aviation, still in its infancy, would not be allowed to crumble under fear. Each investigation, each lesson would build a safer sky.